The blood-red sunset painted the vast Colorado sky as Willow Fairchild stood at the edge of Las Animas, her home for 21 years, with nothing but a small leather satchel and tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. The town council's verdict still rang in her ears. Banishment for choosing to love Thomas Barrett, son of the rival cattle baron who'd been accused of stealing Las Animas water rights for years. April 1875 had been unseasonably warm, and Willow's throat ached with thirst as she stumbled away from the only life she'd ever known. Her father's final words cut deeper than any knife. "No daughter of mine would betray her family for a Barrett. You're dead to us now." She collapsed beneath a gnarled cottonwood tree several miles outside town, her legs finally giving way after walking for hours. The setting sun stretched her shadow long across the dusty ground as her body shook with sobs. Everything had unraveled so quickly after she and Thomas were discovered meeting secretly by the creek. Thomas had been forced back to his father's ranch at gunpoint, and Willow faced the town's judgment alone. "Madam, you all right there?" the voice startled her. Willow hastily wiped her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. She looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. A cowboy atop a sturdy palomino, hat pulled low, face half hidden in shadow. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice breaking. "Just resting." The stranger dismounted with practiced ease, boots stirring up small clouds of dust as he approached. In the fading light, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and kind eyes that didn't match his weathered appearance. "No offense intended, madam, but you don't look fine to me." He crouched down to her level, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Kieran O'Brien. I've got a camp set up just over that ridge if you'd like some coffee and a proper place to rest." Willow stiffened. "I don't need charity from strangers." "Not offering charity." His voice carried a slight Irish lilt. "Just seems wrong to leave a lady alone out here with night coming on. Mountain lions get mighty curious after dark." A distant coyote howl punctuated his point. Willow shivered despite herself. "What brings you out here anyway?" he asked, his tone conversational rather than prying. The question broke something inside her. "I've been cast out, banished from Las Animas for loving the wrong man, according to my father and the town council." She expected judgment, maybe even mockery. Instead, Kieran's expression softened. "Love isn't wrong here," he said simply, gesturing to the open landscape. "Out here, the only law that matters is what's in your heart." Something about his words, or perhaps the gentle way he said them, made fresh tears spring to Willow's eyes. Not tears of despair this time, but of relief, of being seen. "I don't even know where I'm going," she admitted. "Well," Kieran said, extending his hand to help her up, "sometimes not knowing is the start of the best journey." His calloused palm was warm against hers. "My fire's got room for another soul tonight, if you've nowhere else to be." Willow hesitated only a moment before accepting his hand. As she stood, the last of the sun's rays caught in her auburn hair, creating a halo effect that made Kieran catch his breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he said with a small smile. "My coffee's strong enough to make a mule kick." For the first time that day, Willow felt the ghost of a smile tug at her lips. As they walked toward his horse, she had no way of knowing that this stranger's kindness marked the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. Kieran helped Willow onto his horse, Sundown, before climbing up behind her. He was careful to maintain a respectful distance, but the shared saddle meant she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. The warmth of another person after hours of lonely walking was both comforting and unsettling. "Been working cattle for the McKinney spread," Kieran explained as they rode. "Just finished a 2-week stretch and heading to Denver for supplies before the next drive." "You're not from around here," Willow observed, grateful for conversation to distract her from her grief. "Born in Boston to Irish immigrants," he confirmed. "Father worked himself to death in the factories. Mother followed him to the grave a year later. I headed west when I was 17, figured I'd rather die under an open sky than suffocate in a tenement." "I'm sorry," Willow said softly. "Don't be, found my calling out here." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Never felt right hemmed in by walls and rules. Rules. The word reminded Willow of her situation, and her shoulders slumped. The rules in Las Animas are quite clear about consorting with the enemy. And who decided these Barrett folks were enemies? Our families have been feuding for nearly 2 decades over water rights to Purgatoire River, Willow explained. Thomas's father, Henry Barrett, diverted some of the flow to their ranch years ago. My father, Joseph Fairchild, never forgave him for it. And the children pay for the sins of the fathers, Kieran remarked, his voice low. Tale as old as time. They crested a small rise, and Willow saw a modest campsite below a small fire, a bedroll and saddlebags propped against a rock. It wasn't much, but in that moment it seemed like sanctuary. Kieran helped her dismount before tending to his horse. Make yourself comfortable. I'll get the coffee going. Willow sank down near the fire, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. She watched Kieran move efficiently around the camp, his movements speaking of years lived under the stars. There was something soothing about his presence, a calm confidence that didn't demand attention. So, he said as he handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee, what was your plan after walking away from town? Willow stared into the dark liquid. I don't have one, she admitted. Thomas and I had talked about running away to Denver together, but after we were discovered. Her voice trailed off. This Thomas, Kieran said carefully, settling across from her. Does he know you've been cast out? Willow shook her head. His father's men took him back to their ranch at gunpoint. The town council convened immediately after. I doubt he even knows what happened to me. Kieran's jaw tightened. Separating two people who care for each other because of an old grudge doesn't seem right. It's not just any grudge, Willow explained. The Barrett-Fairchild feud has divided Las Animas for years. Half the businesses in town won't serve Barrett men. There have been fistfights, sabotaged cattle drives, burned fences. She sipped her coffee, wincing at its strength. Thomas and I thought we could change things, show everyone that reconciliation was possible. Brave thought, Kieran commented, respect evident in his voice. Foolish, more like, Willow replied bitterly. Now I've lost my family, my home, everything. Not everything, Kieran said, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. You've still got your courage and your principles. Plenty of folks trade those away for comfort. They fell silent for a while, the crackling fire and night sounds of the prairie creating a peaceful backdrop. Willow felt her eyelids growing heavy. You should rest, Kieran said, noticing her fatigue. You can use my bedroll, I'll keep watch. I couldn't possibly, I insist, he interrupted gently. Been sleeping rough since I was 17. One more night under the stars won't hurt me none. Too exhausted to argue, Willow gratefully accepted his offer. As she settled into the worn bedroll, she looked up at the vast expanse of stars above. Mr. O'Brien, just Kieran is fine. Kieran, thank you for your kindness tonight. He tipped his hat slightly. Get some rest, Miss Fairchild. Tomorrow's a new day. As Willow drifted to sleep, she wondered what that new day might bring. For the first time since her banishment, she felt something besides despair, a tiny flicker of hope, fragile but persistent, like the small flame Kieran carefully tended through the night. Dawn broke with soft pink fingers stretching across the eastern horizon. Willow awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, scanning the campsite. Kieran was already awake, cooking something that smelled tantalizingly of bacon over the rekindled fire. Morning, he greeted, his voice cheerful despite the shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd kept his word about staying awake. Hope you like your bacon crispy. Willow smoothed her rumpled dress self-consciously. You didn't have to give up your rest for me. Sleep comes easy enough under these skies, he replied with a shrug, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. There's water in that canteen if you want to freshen up. Grateful for his thoughtfulness, Willow took the canteen and walked a short distance away for privacy. The cool water on her face helped clear her mind, and as she tidied her appearance as best she could, she tried to formulate a plan. When she returned to the fire, Kieran handed her a plate with bacon and hardtack. It's not fancy, but it'll keep you going. It's perfect, she said sincerely. After a few bites, she gathered her courage. I need to ask you something. Kieran looked up, waiting. You mentioned you're heading to Denver. Willow began hesitantly. Would it be possible? That is, would you mind if I traveled with you, just until we reach the city? I can pay you. She reached for her small satchel. I have some money saved. Kieran held up a hand, stopping her. Put your money away. You're welcome to ride with me to Denver. I insist on contributing something, Willow pressed. The thought of being indebted to a man she barely knew, however kind he seemed, made her uneasy. Kieran considered this. Fair enough. Can you cook? Willow nodded. Very well, according to my father's ranch hands. Then we have a deal. You handle the cooking when we make camp, and I'll see you safely to Denver. He extended his hand, and they shook on it formally, his large hand enveloping her smaller one. What will you do once you reach the city? He asked as they began packing up the camp. Willow secured her satchel, her movements deliberate. Find work, I suppose. I can keep books, and hopefully locate Thomas somehow. She glanced up, half expecting to see judgment in Kieran's eyes. Instead, she found only thoughtful consideration. Denver's a big place. Finding one man might prove difficult. I have to try, she said firmly. Even if only to know he's all right. Kieran nodded, respecting her determination. It's about 3 days' ride if the weather holds. We'll need to stop in Pueblo for supplies. As they mounted Sundown Willow again in front with Kieran, behind she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of trepidation and excitement. 3 days of travel with a man she barely knew, followed by the daunting prospect of making her way alone in Denver. Yet there was something liberating about leaving behind the suffocating expectations of Los Animas. They rode in companionable silence for much of the morning, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the vast landscape conducive to quiet reflection. Around midday, they stopped near a small stream to rest and water sundown. May I ask you something personal? Willow ventured as they sat in the shade of a scrubby juniper. You can ask, Kieran replied with a small smile. Can't promise I'll answer. Fair enough. Have you ever been in love? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stared into the distance before answering. Once, girl named Sarah back in Kansas. Her father owned the general store in a little town called Cottonwood Falls. What happened? Cholera happened, swept through the town in '68. Sarah, her parents, her little brother all gone in a week. His voice was matter of fact, but Willow could hear the old pain beneath the words. I'm so sorry, she said softly. Kieran shrugged. It was a long time ago, 7 years now, and you never found anyone else. Hard to find someone when you're always moving, he replied. Cowboy's life doesn't lend itself to settling down. Have you ever wanted to? The question hung in the air between them. Finally, Kieran turned to look at her directly. Sometimes I think about having a place of my own. Somewhere with good water and enough grass for a small herd, maybe a garden. A self-conscious smile crossed his face. Sounds dull compared to driving cattle across 5 states. It sounds lovely, Willow said sincerely. Something flickered in Kieran's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation for her understanding. The moment stretched between them until he abruptly stood. Best get moving if we want to make good distance before nightfall, he said, his tone businesslike again. As they continued their journey, Willow found herself stealing glances at her traveling companion. There was more to Kieran O'Brien than met the eye depths of feeling he kept carefully guarded behind his easygoing exterior. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air carried the unmistakable scent of approaching rain. We need to find shelter, Kieran announced, scanning the landscape. That storm looks mean. Willow followed his gaze with concern. Is there a town nearby? Nothing close enough. He pointed to a rocky outcropping about half a mile to the west. There might be an overhang we can use for cover. They urged Sundown toward the rocks, the wind picking up and whipping Willow's skirts. The first fat raindrops began to fall just as they reached the formation, and to their relief, there was indeed a shallow cave-like overhang, deep enough to shelter both them and the horse. As Kieran quickly set about making a small, sheltered fire, Willow couldn't help but think how different her life had become in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she'd awakened in her bedroom in her father's house, with all the certainties of her life intact. Now she was huddled in a cave with a cowboy she'd just met, heading toward an unknown future. Strangely, despite everything, she didn't feel afraid. The storm raged through the night, lightning illuminating the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. Under the stone overhang, Willow and Kieran sat close to the small fire, sharing a meal of beans and jerky she had prepared from his supplies. "Tell me about him," Kieran said unexpectedly. "About who?" "Thomas Barrett. The man worth losing everything for." Willow was surprised by the question but found herself wanting to answer. "Thomas is gentle, thoughtful. He loves poetry and can recite Whitman from memory." A small smile played at her lips. "We met at the county fair last summer. Our fathers were both occupied with a judging dispute over cattle, and we literally bumped into each other behind the food stalls." Love at first sight. There was a hint of teasing in Kieran's voice. "Hardly," Willow laughed. "I spilled lemonade all over his new shirt." He was quite annoyed until he realized who I was. Then he became curious. She stared into the flames, remembering. "We started meeting secretly after that, at first just to understand the other side of the feud, but then, you fell in love," Kieran finished for her when she trailed off. "We talked about ending the feud through our marriage," Willow continued. "A union of the families. Thomas believed his father could be reasoned with given time. But you were discovered before that could happen." Willow nodded, the pain still fresh. "Thomas's cousin saw us meeting and told his father. Everything happened so fast after that." Kieran was silent for a moment, considering. "You must love him very much to risk everything." "I thought it was the right thing to do," Willow said softly. "Not just for us, but for everyone. The feud has hurt the whole town." Outside, the storm began to subside, the thunder more distant now. In the relative quiet that followed, Kieran's next question came gently. "And if you can't find him in Denver?" Willow hadn't allowed herself to consider this possibility. "I have to," she said with more conviction than she felt. Kieran nodded but said nothing more, and Willow was grateful he didn't push the issue. Instead, he changed the subject, telling her stories of his travels across the West, cattle drives through Montana, winters in Wyoming, summer work in the California gold country. His tales painted a picture of a life filled with freedom and adventure, hardship and beauty in equal measure. As they settled for sleep, Kieran again, insisting she take the bedroll, while he made do with his saddle blanket, Willow found herself wondering about the path her life would have taken if she'd never met Thomas. Would she have remained in Los Animas, eventually marrying some local boy approved by her father? The thought felt stifling now, after just one day of experiencing the vastness beyond her town's boundaries. The rain continued softly through the night, a gentle percussion on the rocks above them. Before sleep claimed her, Willow glanced over at Kieran's silhouette, outlined by the dying embers of their fire. There was something comforting about his presence, something solid and dependable that made the uncertain future seem less frightening. Morning brought clear skies and fresh, rain-washed air. They set out early, Kieran estimating they could reach Pueblo by nightfall if they maintained a good pace. The landscape had transformed overnight, desert wildflowers having burst into bloom after the rain, painting the usually drab plains with splashes of yellow, purple, and red. "It's beautiful," Willow breathed, taking in the unexpected display. "Deserts full of surprises," Kieran replied. "Things just waiting for the right conditions to flourish." Willow pondered his words as they rode, wondering if there might be a metaphor for her own life in there somewhere. Perhaps leaving Los Animas was the rain she needed to bloom. Around midday, they spotted a small homestead in the distance. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and a few chickens pecked in a fenced yard. "Might be a good place to rest and water the horse," Kieran suggested. "Maybe trade for some fresh food if they're amenable." As they approached, a weathered woman in her 50s emerged from the cabin, a shotgun held casually but visibly in her hands. "That's far enough," she called when they were within earshot. "State your business." Kieran raised his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "Just passing through, madam, heading to Pueblo. Wondered if we might water our horse and rest a spell. Happy to trade for the privilege." The woman studied them, her sharp eyes taking in Willow's obviously fine if now somewhat dusty dress and their single horse. "You two married?" She asked bluntly. "No, madam," Kieran answered before Willow could speak. "Miss Fairchild here is traveling to Denver to meet family. I'm escorting her as far as the city." The woman's eyebrow raised slightly, but whatever judgment she might have harbored, she kept to herself. Water's round back. There's a pump. You're welcome to sit in the shade of that cottonwood. Been baking bread this morning, can spare a loaf in exchange for news or goods. That's mighty kind, Kieran said. We've got coffee beans to trade and news from Los Animas way. The woman who eventually introduced herself as Martha Simmons seemed satisfied with the arrangement. While Kieran tended to sundown, Willow found herself helping Martha hang laundry, grateful for the company of another woman. Been out here 15 years with my husband, Martha explained as they worked. He passed on 3 winters ago, pneumonia. You've stayed on alone. Willow couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Where else would I go? Martha replied matter-of-factly. This is my home. Built it with these hands alongside Daniel's. Land's paid for. I grow what I need, trade for the rest. She eyed Willow curiously. World's full of women making do on their own, Miss Fairchild. Sooner you learn that, better off you'll be. There was something both daunting and inspiring about Martha's independence. Willow found herself wondering if she could ever develop such self-sufficiency. Your young man seems decent enough, Martha commented as they finished with the laundry. Respectful, too many aren't these days. He's not Willow began, then stopped, unsure how to explain the situation. Martha's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. None of my business either way, just saying he's got honest eyes. That counts for something in this world. They rejoined Kieran, who was fixing a loose board on Martha's chicken coop, a task he'd apparently volunteered for while Willow was occupied with the laundry. Martha insisted they stay for a simple midday meal of bread and stew, and the conversation flowed easily among the 3 of them. As they prepared to leave, Martha pressed a bundle into Willow's hands. Fresh bread and some preserves, she explained. Journey's easier with a full belly. Thank you, Willow said sincerely, for everything. Martha nodded, then leaned in closer. Word of advice, girl to girl. Whatever you're running from or to keep your options open, life has a way of presenting unexpected paths. Before Willow could respond, Martha had turned to Kieran to thank him for the repair work. Soon they were back on the trail, Pueblo still several hours ahead. She was nice, Willow commented as they rode. Tough as nails, that one, Kieran agreed admiringly. Surviving out here alone takes grit. She thought you were Well, that we were together, Willow said, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. Kieran chuckled. Easier to let her think that than explain the whole complicated truth, I figured. Yes, I suppose so. Willow fell silent, Martha's parting advice echoing in her mind. Keep your options open, but what exactly were her options? Find Thomas, and somehow build a life together despite both their families' opposition. Fail to find him and forge a solitary path like Martha. The future stretched before her, filled with uncertainties. As the afternoon wore on, the terrain gradually changed, becoming more varied as they approached Pueblo. The sight of the town on the horizon as dusk fell brought both relief and anxiety to Willow. It meant a proper bed for the night, but also represented her first test of independence in a strange place. Pueblo in 1875 was a growing town of several thousand, situated at the confluence of the Arkansas River and Fountain Creek. Its streets bustled with activity, even as evening approached. Cowboys, miners, traders, and families all going about their business under the glow of oil lamps being lit along the main thoroughfare. Kieran guided them to a modest boarding house on a side street, away from the saloons and more boisterous establishments. Wait here, he instructed, helping Willow dismount before heading inside to inquire about rooms. Standing alone on the street with sundown, Willow suddenly felt conspicuous. A few passers-by glanced curiously in her direction, and she realized what a strange sight she must present a young woman in a fine but travel-worn dress, clearly out of her element. Kieran emerged from the boarding house looking pleased. Got you a room for the night, he said. Elderly widow runs the place, Mrs. Holloway. Very proper, she says meals are included. And you? Willow asked. I'll stable sundown at the livery and find a room at the Drover's Hotel down the street, he replied. Meet you here at 8 tomorrow morning to continue on. Willow felt a surprising pang at the thought of spending the night without Kieran's reassuring presence nearby. Yes, that sounds fine. Mrs. Holloway turned out to be a tiny woman with a stern face but kind eyes who showed Willow to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Supper's in 20 minutes, she announced. "Bathrooms down the hall if you want to freshen up. No gentlemen visitors in the rooms, that's the rule." "Of course," Willow agreed quickly. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway." Left alone, Willow sank onto the bed, the events of the past 2 days catching up with her. She'd gone from being Joseph Fairchild's sheltered daughter to a young woman alone in a strange town with nothing but a satchel of belongings and the uncertain hope of finding her love in Denver. And then there was Kieran, a man who'd shown her nothing but kindness and respect since finding her weeping beneath that cottonwood tree, a man who'd given up his bedroll and stayed awake to ensure her safety, a man whose quiet strength somehow made her feel both protected and empowered. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "Thomas is waiting in Denver." But even as she spoke the words, a small voice in the back of her mind wondered if that was really true. Was Thomas searching for her, or had he accepted their separation as inevitable? Shaking off these unsettling thoughts, Willow used the washing basin to clean up before heading downstairs for supper. The boarding house dining room held 3 other guests, an older couple who appeared to be traveling salespeople, and a spectacled young man who introduced himself as a surveyor working for the railroad. The meal was simple but hearty, and the conversation remained pleasantly superficial. No one asked Willow direct questions about her circumstances, for which she was grateful. When she returned to her room after the meal, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Willow awoke feeling refreshed, the luxury of a real bed having done wonders for her spirits. After breakfast, she settled her bill with Mrs. Holloway and stepped outside to find Kieran already waiting, sundown looking rested and ready for travel. "Sleep well?" he asked, smiling. "Very," Willow admitted. "And you?" "Well enough," Kieran replied, though she noticed the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. "Got us some supplies for the road." He indicated the freshly filled saddlebags. They set off, leaving Pueblo behind as the morning sun climbed higher. The terrain grew increasingly dramatic as they traveled, with the distant peaks of the Rocky Mountains becoming more defined on the horizon. "We'll follow the Fountain Creek north," Kieran explained. "Should reach Colorado Springs by this evening, then on to Denver tomorrow." Willow nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Each mile brought her closer to Denver and to whatever fate awaited her there. Would Thomas be searching for her, and if she found him, what then? As if sensing her unease, Kieran began pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the region, from tales of the original Ute inhabitants to more recent frontier adventures. His voice was soothing, and Willow found herself relaxing against him as they rode, the steady rhythm of Sundown's gait and Kieran's storytelling creating a cocoon of temporary security. By mid-afternoon, they stopped in a small grove of trees to rest and eat. Sharing the bread and preserves from Martha, they sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of birds and the nearby creek. "May I ask you something?" Kieran said eventually. "Of course." "What if Thomas has already left Denver, or never made it there at all?" The question struck at Willow's greatest fear. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't allowed myself to think that far ahead." "Perhaps you should," Kieran suggested gently. "Not to discourage you, but to prepare yourself." Willow plucked at a blade of grass, considering his words. "What would you do? If you were in my position," Kieran took his time answering. "I'd give myself a deadline," he said finally, "a specific amount of time to search, and if that time passed without success, I'd take it as a sign to build a new life. Just give up on him." The idea felt like a betrayal. "Not giving up," Kieran corrected. "Moving forward, there's a difference." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Love is precious, Willow, but so is your life. Don't spend it waiting for something that might never come." His use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Since they'd met, he'd been scrupulously formal, addressing her as Miss Fairchild even as they'd shared meals and a campfire. "I'll consider it," she promised, touched by his concern. They continued their journey, the conversation turning to lighter topics as Colorado Springs grew nearer. By dusk, they'd reached the growing settlement nestled at the foot of Pikes Peak, its streets busier than Pueblo's and lined with more substantial buildings. Unlike the previous night, Kieran found them rooms at the same boarding house across the hall from each other. He assured her with a grin that acknowledged the proprieties they were carefully maintaining. After a simple dinner in the boarding house dining room, they stepped outside to enjoy the cool evening air. "One more day to Denver," Kieran remarked as they strolled along the quiet residential street. "Yes," Willow agreed, her stomach tightening at the thought. "You nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "I've never been alone in a city before. I don't know the first thing about finding someone in a place that size." Kieran hesitated before speaking. "I could stay a few days," he offered. "Help you get settled, maybe even help look for Thomas." Willow stopped walking, turning to face him in surprise. "You do that? Even though you're supposed to return to the McKinney ranch," Kieran shrugged. "McKinney can wait a few more days for his supplies. Cowhen looking for work isn't exactly rare in these parts." The offer touched her deeply. "Why would you do that for me?" In the lamplight, his expression was difficult to read. "Because you deserve a fair chance," he said simply. "And Denver can be overwhelming for someone not used to city ways." "Thank you," Willow said softly. "I accept your offer." They stood there for a moment, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Kieran broke the spell first, clearing his throat and suggesting they return to the boarding house to rest for tomorrow's journey. That night, lying in her bed, Willow found herself thinking not of Thomas and their reunion, but of Kieran's kindness and the unexpected path her life had taken. For the first time since leaving Las Animas, she felt not just hope, but a sense of possibility, as if the world had suddenly expanded beyond the confines of the Barrett-Fairchild feud. With this newfound perspective came sleep, and with sleep came dreams of wide open spaces and a soft Irish lilt guiding her through them. The journey to Denver the following day took them through increasingly populated areas as they approached the growing city. By late afternoon, the skyline of Denver appeared before them, not the soaring buildings of later decades, but impressive nonetheless to Willow's eyes, accustomed as they were to the modest structures of Las Animas. "There she is," Kieran announced. "Denver City. About 20,000 souls now, they say." Willow tried to mask her apprehension as they rode closer, the streets gradually becoming more crowded with wagons, riders, and pedestrians. The noise and bustle were unlike anything she'd experienced before. Kieran guided them expertly through the chaos to a respectable-looking hotel on a side street, not the fanciest establishment but clean and proper. "Stay here," he instructed as he helped her dismount. "I'll secure us rooms and then stable sundown." Left alone on the bustling sidewalk, Willow clutched her satchel tightly, feeling conspicuously out of place. A pair of well-dressed ladies passed by, giving her travel-worn appearance dubious glances. Self-consciously, Willow tried to smooth her skirts and tidy her wind-blown hair. Kieran returned quickly. "Got us adjoining rooms," he announced. "And I asked about a bathhouse nearby. Thought you might appreciate a proper bath after days on the trail." The consideration brought unexpected tears to Willow's eyes. "That sounds heavenly," she admitted. "There's one just down the block that caters to ladies. I can walk you there after we get settled." The hotel room was simple but clean, with a real bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the street below. Willow set down her meager belongings and took a moment to collect herself, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She was in Denver, hundreds of miles from her former home, with no family, little money, and only the vaguest plan of finding Thomas Barrett. A soft knock at the door connecting her room to Kieran's interrupted her thoughts. "Settled in?" he asked when she opened it. "If you're ready, I can show you to that bathhouse now." The bathhouse turned out to be a revelation: hot water, scented soap, and actual privacy behind a curtained stall. Willow emerged feeling transformed, her hair clean and her spirits lifted. She'd packed one change of clothes in her satchel, a simple blue dress that had thankfully remained relatively unwrinkled. Kieran waited for her outside, looking similarly refreshed after his own visit to the men's section. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his dark hair, and for the first time Willow fully appreciated how handsome he was when not covered in trail dust. "You look." He began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "Refreshed," he finished politely. "As do you," she replied with a small smile. They found a modest restaurant for dinner, where Kieran suggested they discuss plans for the following day. "Denver's a big place," he explained as they ate. "We need a systematic approach to finding Thomas. Do you know where he might have gone? Any friends or contacts he has here?" Willow thought back to her conversations with Thomas. He mentioned an uncle, his mother's brother, James Whitley, I believe. Thomas said he owns an investment firm here. Kieran nodded. "That's a good start. Businessmen like that are usually easy to locate. We can ask at the post office or city hall tomorrow." The matter-of-fact way he included himself in her search warmed Willow's heart. "Thank you for doing this," she said softly. "You've already done more than I had any right to expect from a stranger." "We're hardly strangers now," Kieran replied with a gentle smile. That night, alone in her hotel room, Willow found herself standing at the window, gazing out at the lamplit streets of Denver. Somewhere in this city, Thomas might be waiting, perhaps even searching for her. The thought should have filled her with excitement, but instead, she felt a strange ambivalence. The past 3 days with Kieran had shown her a different kind of life, one with more freedom and fewer constraints than she'd known in Los Animas. He treated her as an equal, capable of making her own choices, not as someone to be protected or controlled. It was liberating, and if she found Thomas, would they recapture what they'd had in Los Animas, or had too much changed? Would he still want to reconcile their families, or had he moved on to a new life here in Denver? With these unsettling questions swirling in her mind, Willow eventually fell into a restless sleep. Morning brought a clear sky and renewed determination. After breakfast, Kieran and Willow set out to locate James Whitley's investment firm. Their first stop was the post office, where a helpful clerk directed them to a handsome brick building on Larimer Street, bearing a brass plaque that read Whitley Investments. Standing before the imposing entrance, Willow suddenly felt nervous. What if he refuses to help us? The Barrett-Fairchild feud is well known. "Only one way to find out," Kieran replied, offering his arm for support as they climbed the steps. Inside, a well-dressed clerk looked up from his ledger. "May I help you? We'd like to speak with Mr. James Whitley, if possible," Kieran said politely. The clerk's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's a family matter," Willow interjected. "Regarding his nephew, Thomas Barrett." At the mention of Thomas, the clerk's expression changed subtly. "One moment, please." He disappeared through a door, returning moments later. "Mr. Whitley will see you." They were ushered into a handsomely appointed office where a distinguished-looking man in his 50s stood waiting. James Whitley bore a striking resemblance to Thomas's mother, the same clear blue eyes and proud bearing. "I understand you're inquiring about my nephew," he said without preamble. His gaze fixed on Willow. "And you are Willow Fairchild, sir." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Fairchild, Joseph Fairchild's daughter from Los Animas." "Yes, sir." Whitley studied her for a long moment before turning to Kieran. "And you, Kieran O'Brien, I'm accompanying Miss Fairchild." Whitley gestured for them to sit. "I received a telegram from my sister a week ago," he said once they were seated. "She mentioned a situation involving Thomas and a young woman from the Fairchild family." Willow's heart raced. "Is Thomas here in Denver?" "He was," Whitley confirmed. "He arrived 4 days ago, quite distressed. Told me about your relationship and how it had been discovered." Willow couldn't keep the dismay from her voice. "He's not here now," Whitley's expression softened slightly. "He left yesterday morning. Said he needed to return to Los Animas to face his father and find you. He was convinced you were in some kind of danger or distress." Willow felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her. "He went back, but I was cast out, banished from Los Animas for loving him." "He didn't know that," Whitley said quietly. "He only knew that after he was forced to return to his father's ranch, no one would tell him what had happened to you. He escaped 2 nights later and made his way here, but he couldn't bear the thought of you suffering because of him. He was determined to return and make things right. Kieran placed a steadying hand on Willow's arm as she swayed slightly in her chair. "So we've passed each other on the road," she whispered. "While I was coming to Denver to find him, he was returning to Los Animas to find me." "It appears so," Whitley agreed. "Thomas left by stagecoach yesterday morning. Given the schedule, he's likely reached Pueblo by now." "We have to go after him," Willow said, turning to Kieran. "Before he reaches Los Animas and puts himself in danger." Kieran nodded. "We can leave this afternoon if we hurry." Whitley cleared his throat. "If I may make a suggestion, the eastbound train departs for Pueblo at 2 o'clock. It would be faster than traveling by horse." "We don't have tickets," Willow began. "Consider it done," Whitley interrupted, reaching for his wallet. "Any man willing to risk everything for my nephew's happiness has my support. And you, Miss Fairchild Thomas, spoke very highly of you, said you were the bravest, most principled young woman he'd ever met." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Whitley." Within the hour, they had returned to the hotel, gathered their belongings, and arranged for Sundown to be stabled until Kieran's return. By early afternoon, they were seated on the eastbound train to Pueblo, the locomotive's whistle piercing the air as it pulled away from Denver's Union Station. "I can't believe we missed him by a day," Willow said, gazing out the window as the city gradually gave way to open countryside. "If we'd arrived yesterday." "No use dwelling on what might have been," Kieran advised gently. "We know where he's headed now, and we're not far behind." Willow turned to look at him, struck by a sudden realization. "You're still helping me, even though it means going back toward Los Animas." Kieran's expression was unreadable. "I said I'd help you find Thomas. I keep my promises. But after we find him," she hesitated. "What then?" he shrugged, his gaze drifting to the passing landscape. "Then you'll be where you're meant to be, and I'll continue on my way." The thought of parting from Kieran created an unexpected ache in Willow's chest. In less than a week, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. She valued his quiet strength, his unwavering support, his respect for her decisions even when he might have disagreed with them. "Kieran," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. He turned back to her, something vulnerable in his eyes that he quickly masked. "You should rest," he suggested. "It'll be a few hours before we reach Pueblo." Nodding, Willow settled back in her seat, but rest eluded her. Her mind raced with thoughts of Thomas returning to Los Animas, potentially facing her father's wrath or worse. And beneath those immediate concerns lay deeper questions about her own heart and what or who it truly wanted. The train rocked steadily southward, carrying her toward a confrontation that would determine the course of her future. They reached Pueblo as dusk was falling, the platform bustling with travelers arriving and departing. Kieran quickly secured lodging at a small hotel near the station while Willow inquired about stagecoach schedules. "The Los Animas stage left this morning," the ticket agent informed her. "Next one isn't until day after tomorrow." "And has a passenger named Thomas Barrett been through recently?" Willow asked hopefully. The agent squinted, trying to recall. "Young fella, well-dressed, in a hurry, came through yesterday, took the morning stage today." Seemed mighty determined to get to Los Animas. Willow's heart sank. Thomas was already a full day ahead of them, and they couldn't follow until the day after tomorrow. "Isn't there any other way to get to Los Animas sooner?" she pressed. The agent shook his head. "Not unless you've got private transportation. Roads are rough this time of year after the spring rains." Dejected, Willow rejoined Kieran outside the ticket office. "Thomas left on this morning's stage," she reported, "and we can't follow until day after tomorrow." Kieran considered this news. "We could try to hire horses," he suggested, "or a private wagon. Could we catch up to him that way? Possibly, if we leave at first light and push hard." He didn't sound entirely convinced, but the stage has a head start and relays of fresh horses. Willow paced anxiously. "He doesn't know I've been banished. He'll ride straight into Los Animas expecting to find me at my father's house. What if my father has him arrested? Or worse?" Kieran placed his hands gently on her shoulders, steadying her. "Thomas is going home to his family's ranch first," he reasoned. "That's the logical thing to do. He'll want to settle matters with his father before approaching yours. That gives us time." His calm logic helped ease her panic. "You're right," she conceded. And his ranch is outside town, so he'd have to make inquiries before learning what happened to me. Exactly. Now, let's get some rest. Tomorrow we'll arrange transportation and set out as early as possible. Over dinner at a small cafe near their hotel, they discussed strategies for intercepting Thomas before he reached Las Animas. Kieran produced a small map of the region and marked the likely route. If we can get horses or a light buggy, we might be able to take this shortcut, he said, tracing a line across the map. It's rougher terrain but cuts off about 15 miles. As they talked, Willow couldn't help but admire Kieran's practical approach and determination to help her, despite the fact that their success meant she would be reunited with another man. The realization brought with it a pang of something like regret. Why are you doing all this? She asked suddenly. Being banished from Las Animas was the worst moment of my life, but if it hadn't happened, I never would have met you. And now we're rushing to find the very man whose relationship with me caused my banishment in the first place. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. When I found you under that cottonwood tree, he finally said, you were willing to risk everything for love. That kind of courage deserves support, not judgment. He paused, then added softly, and you deserve to be happy, Willow. But what about your happiness? She pressed. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I've learned to find contentment in the open country and honest work. Some men aren't meant for settling down. Before she could question this assertion, he changed the subject, returning to their travel plans for the following day. That night, in the privacy of her hotel room, Willow found herself torn between conflicting emotions. The urgency to find Thomas and prevent him from walking into danger in Las Animas remained. But alongside, it had grown something else, a deep appreciation for Kieran that increasingly felt like more than simple gratitude. She thought back to Martha Simmons' parting advice: keep your options open. Life has a way of presenting unexpected paths. Was Kieran O'Brien an unexpected path? And if so, what did that mean for her feelings for Thomas? Morning came with no clearer answers, only the pressing need to begin their journey. Kieran had risen early and already arranged for a light buggy and 2 horses by the time Willow came down for breakfast. Ready by 9, he announced as they ate. Not the fastest rig, but sturdy enough for the shortcut I mentioned. They set out under clear skies, the spring sun warming the air as they left Pueblo behind. The main road south was relatively well-traveled, but after a few hours, Kieran directed their buggy onto a less defined trail that cut eastward through rougher terrain. This will save us time if the horses hold up, he explained. It's an old cattle trail that eventually rejoins the main road about 20 miles north of Las Animas. The shortcut proved challenging a narrow, rutted path that wound through rocky hills and across several shallow creeks. Kieran handled the reins expertly, but progress was slower than they'd hoped. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Looks like rain coming, Kieran observed, frowning at the sky. We should find shelter soon. But we need to keep going, Willow protested. Thomas is already a day ahead of us. Won't do him any good if we break an axle or lame a horse trying to push through a storm, Kieran countered gently. There's an old line shack about a mile ahead if I remember right. We can wait out the worst of it there. The rain began just as the small, weathered cabin came into view, a simple one-room structure built by cattle companies for their cowboys to use during long drives. Inside, it was dusty but intact, with a small stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a narrow cot. While Kieran stabled the horses in the attached lean-to, Willow swept the worst of the dust out and gathered wood for a fire from the small stockpile outside. By the time the rain was coming down in earnest, they had a cheerful blaze going and coffee brewing on the small iron stove someone had left behind. Could be worse, Kieran remarked, looking around the snug cabin as he dried his rain-dampened hair with a bandana. I've spent many a night in places far less comfortable. The storm intensified as evening approached, rain hammering on the wooden roof and wind whistling through the cabin's aging chinks. Despite her anxiety about Thomas, Willow found herself grateful for the solid walls and warm fire. They shared a simple meal from their supplies, sitting close to the hearth as thunder rolled overhead. The single room felt intimate in the firelight, and Willow was acutely aware of Kieran's presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the careful distance he maintained between them despite their close quarters. "Tell me something," she said as they finished eating. "If you could have any life you wanted, what would it be?" The question seemed to surprise him. He stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I've thought about buying land someday," he admitted. "Nothing grand, just a small spread with good water and enough grass for a few hundred head. Maybe up in Wyoming or Montana, where the summers are green and the winters clean you down to the bone." A small, almost wistful smile crossed his face. "Place of my own, where I answer to no one but myself and the changing seasons." "It sounds wonderful," Willow said softly. "And would you be alone on this land of yours?" Kieran's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "That would depend," he said quietly. "On what?" "On whether I found someone who loved the land and the life as much as I did. Someone who valued freedom and honesty above fancy things or society's good opinion." He paused. "Someone brave enough to choose her own path, even when it wasn't easy." The air between them seemed charged with possibilities. Willow found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "And have you found such a person?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For a breathless moment, it seemed Kieran might close the distance between them. Then, with visible effort, he straightened and moved back slightly. "It's late," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You should take the cot. I'll make do on the floor near the fire." The spell broken, Willow retreated emotionally as well, confused by her own feelings and his withdrawal. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," she protested. "The cot looks big enough to share if we're careful." "No," Kieran said firmly, "that wouldn't be proper." "We've slept near each other for days now," Willow pointed out. "That was different. Out in the open with the stars as chaperones." His tone softened. "I gave your father no promises, but I aim to return you to Thomas Barrett with your reputation intact." The mention of Thomas landed like a stone between them. Willow nodded, suddenly remembering why they were on this journey in the first place. "Of course, you're right." As she settled on the narrow cot, turning her face to the wall, Willow wondered if Thomas would have shown the same restraint and why that thought bothered her. She listened to Kieran moving about the cabin, banking the fire for the night, spreading his bedroll on the rough wooden floor. Eventually, his movements ceased, and the only sounds were the rain on the roof and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with thoughts of Thomas heading unwittingly toward Las Animas, of her father's potential reaction to his return, of the Barrett-Fairchild feud that had shaped so much of her life. And beneath it all, like an underground stream, ran her growing feelings for the man sleeping just a few feet away, feelings she had no right to indulge when she was racing to reunite with another. Dawn broke with lingering rain that soon gave way to patchy sunshine. They set out early, the muddy trail slowing their progress, but still passable. Kieran was quieter than usual, focused on navigating the difficult terrain, while Willow found herself rehearsing what she would say when they finally found Thomas. By midday, they had rejoined the main road, now more heavily rutted after the storm but faster going than the shortcut had been. According to Kieran's estimation, they were now about 30 miles from Las Animas, a half-day's journey under good conditions. If Thomas took the stage all the way, he would have arrived in Las Animas yesterday afternoon, Kieran reasoned as they stopped to rest the horses. Given what his uncle said, he'd go to his family's ranch first before looking for you in town. And once he learns I've been banished. Willow worried her lower lip. What then? Hard to say. Depends on what kind of man he is. Kieran's tone was carefully neutral. If he's as determined as his actions suggest, he might try to follow your trail out of town. Which would lead him toward Pueblo the same way we came in, Willow realized. We might pass him on the road. Kieran nodded. Keep your eyes sharp. They continued southward, the landscape gradually becoming more familiar to Willow as they approached Las Animas County. Each mile increased her anxiety, not only about finding Thomas before he reached town, but also about returning to the place that had cast her out so cruelly. Late in the afternoon, As the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a rise and saw a lone rider approaching from the south. As the distance closed between them, Willow's heart leaped into her throat. "Thomas," she whispered. Kieran reined in the buggy, bringing it to a stop in the middle of the road. The approaching rider slowed his horse, clearly having spotted them as well. As he drew nearer, Willow could make out his features: the familiar blonde hair, the straight posture, the well-tailored clothes now dusty from travel. Thomas Barrett, the man she had risked everything for, the reason for her banishment and this journey. Willow. His voice carried across the remaining distance between them. Disbelief and joy mingled in that single word. She scrambled down from the buggy without waiting for Kieran's assistance, her legs unsteady as she stood in the road. Thomas dismounted quickly, closing the gap between them in long strides before gathering her into a fierce embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into her hair. "When they wouldn't tell me what happened after I was taken away, I feared the worst." Willow clung to him, the familiar scent and feel of him bringing back a rush of memories. "They banished me," she explained, her voice muffled against his chest. "For loving you, my father said I was dead to them." Thomas pulled back slightly to look at her face, his expression darkening with anger. "I'll make this right, Willow, I swear it. You can't go to Las Animas," she insisted. "My father might have you arrested or worse." "I'm not afraid of Joseph Fairchild," Thomas declared. "It's time this feud ended, and if confronting him directly is what it takes—" "It's not just my father," Willow interrupted. "The whole town council voted for my banishment. They won't welcome you any more than they did me." A throat cleared behind them, and Willow suddenly remembered Kieran, still sitting in the buggy. She stepped back from Thomas's embrace, flushing slightly. "Thomas, this is Kieran O'Brien. He found me after I was cast out and has been helping me search for you." Thomas turned toward Kieran, sizing him up with a quick glance. "I'm in your debt, sir," he said formally, extending his hand. "Thank you for looking after Willow when I couldn't." Kieran climbed down from the buggy and shook the offered hand. "Miss Fairchild is a brave woman," he said simply. "Deserved better than being left alone on the trail." Something in his tone made Willow glance sharply at him, but his expression revealed nothing. "We should move off the road," Kieran continued practically. "Make camp before dark and decide on next steps." They found a suitable spot near a small stream, where Thomas and Kieran tended to the horses while Willow prepared a simple meal from their supplies. As they worked, Thomas explained how he had gone first to his family's ranch upon reaching Las Animas, only to have a confrontation with his father that ended with him being disowned for refusing to give up his relationship with Willow. "Father said no son of his would marry a Fairchild," Thomas explained bitterly as they ate. "When I told him I didn't care about his blessing, he ordered me off his property, said I could return when I'd come to my senses." "So you went into town looking for me," Willow guessed. Thomas nodded. "Only to learn from Mrs. Peterson at the general store that you'd been banished 3 days earlier. No one seemed to know which way you'd gone, until old Sam, the stable hand, mentioned seeing a young woman matching your description heading north out of town." "And you followed," Kieran observed. "What choice did I have? The woman I love had been cast out because of me." Thomas reached for Willow's hand. "I was prepared to search every town between here and Canada if necessary." The devotion in his voice was exactly what Willow had dreamed of hearing during the long days of their separation. Yet somehow, it didn't stir her heart the way it once would have. She glanced at Kieran, who was studiously focused on his meal, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "So what happens now?" she asked, looking between the two men. "We've both been disowned by our families. We have nowhere to return to in Las Animas." "We go to Denver," Thomas said decisively. "My uncle will help us get established. He offered me a position at his firm before I left to find you." "And is that what you want?" Kieran asked quietly. "To work at an investment firm in the city?" Thomas looked surprised by the question. "It's a respectable position with good prospects. We could have a comfortable life." "But is it what you want?" Kieran persisted. "Or just what's available?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Willow realized she'd never actually asked Thomas what kind of life he envisioned for them beyond escaping their family's feud. She'd assumed they shared the same dreams, but now she wondered if that was true. "What I want," Thomas said finally, a hint of defensiveness in his tone, "is to provide Willow with the life she deserves, one with security and respectability." Kieran nodded but said nothing more, rising to tend the fire instead. As night deepened, the awkwardness of their sleeping arrangements became apparent. Thomas naturally assumed he and Willow would share the bedroll he'd brought, while Kieran prepared his own space a discreet distance away. "Thomas," Willow said quietly when they were alone near their bedroll, "I think it would be better if we waited until we're properly married before sharing accommodations." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by understanding. "Of course, you're right. Your reputation is important." He glanced toward where Kieran was settling down. "Though I doubt a cowboy would judge us." Something about his dismissive tone bothered Willow. "Kieran has been nothing but honorable since the moment we met," she said, more sharply than she intended. "He gave up his own bedroll for me every night of our journey." Thomas raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I meant no offense. I'm grateful for his help in finding you." He smiled apologetically. "I'm just anxious to begin our life together properly." Willow softened. "As am I. But a few more days of propriety won't hurt us." They arranged themselves on opposite sides of the same bedroll, maintaining a respectful distance between them. As Thomas drifted to sleep, Willow found herself staring up at the stars, her thoughts in turmoil. She had found Thomas, just as she'd set out to do. He still loved her, still wanted to marry her. They had a clear path forward in Denver with his uncle's support. Everything had worked out exactly as she'd hoped when she left Los Animas. So why did her heart feel so conflicted? Across the dying embers of the fire, she could make out Kieran's silhouette, still and quiet in his own bedroll. In less than a week, this man had shown her a different way of living, one defined by self-reliance, moral courage, and a deep respect for the natural world and its freedoms. He'd treated her as an equal partner in their journey, valuing her opinions and respecting her choices even when they didn't align with his own. And tomorrow, they would part ways. Kieran would continue on to wherever the trail led him next, while she and Thomas would begin building their new life in Denver. It was the ending she had sought when she began this journey. Why, then, did it suddenly feel like a beginning cut short? Morning brought clearer skies and difficult goodbyes. After a quick breakfast, they prepared to go their separate ways, Thomas and Willow toward Denver, Kieran continuing on to Pueblo to retrieve Sundown before returning to the McKinney Ranch. As Thomas saddled his horse and secured Willow's small satchel, Kieran approached her where she stood a little apart, gazing northward toward their destination. "Denver will treat you well," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "City's growing fast, lots of opportunities for a fresh start." Willow turned to face him. "Thanks to you, I have that chance at a fresh start." Kieran shook his head slightly. "You would have found your way. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "I'm not sure that's true," she admitted. "When you found me under that cottonwood tree, I was ready to give up. Yet here you stand, reunited with the man you love, about to begin a new life." Kieran glanced over at Thomas, who was checking his horse's cinch. "He's lucky to have earned your heart." Something in his tone made Willow study his face more closely. "Kieran, I all set," Thomas interrupted, leading his horse over to them. "We should get moving if we want to reach Colorado Springs by nightfall." Kieran extended his hand to Thomas. "Safe travels." "Thank you again for everything you've done," Thomas replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Willow and I won't forget your kindness. No need for thanks." Kieran turned to Willow, hesitating before offering his hand to her as well. "Miss Fairchild." The formality stung after days of growing closeness. Ignoring his outstretched hand, Willow stepped forward and embraced him briefly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that love isn't wrong out here." Kieran stiffened momentarily before returning the embrace with gentle restraint. "Be happy," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite conceal. Then he stepped back, nodded once to them both, and turned toward the buggy. Willow watched as he climbed up and took the reins, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Thomas helped her mount his horse, climbing up behind her as Kieran had done that first day. But as they set off in opposite directions, Willow couldn't help looking back over her shoulder, watching Kieran's figure grow smaller in the distance. The journey to Denver with Thomas should have been filled with joy and plans for their future. Instead, Willow found herself distracted and unusually quiet. Thomas seemed to attribute her mood to exhaustion from their ordeal, filling the silence with his own thoughts about the position at his uncle's firm and the life they would build together. "Uncle James has connections throughout Denver society," he explained enthusiastically. "Once we're properly married, you'll be welcomed into the best homes. Nothing like the provincial attitudes in Los Animas." Willow nodded politely, though privately she wondered if exchanging one set of societal expectations for another represented the freedom she'd begun to crave during her journey with Kieran. They stopped overnight in Colorado Springs, where Thomas insisted on a proper hotel rather than a simple boarding house. "You deserve some comfort after everything you've been through," he said as he ushered her into a well-appointed room with its own private bath. The luxury should have delighted her, but Willow found herself missing the simplicity of nights under the stars, the honest conversation around a campfire, the self-reliance of making do with what they had. By the time they reached Denver the following evening, Willow was wrestling with doubts she could barely admit to herself. Thomas took her directly to his uncle's impressive home in one of Denver's more fashionable neighborhoods, where they were warmly welcomed. "I've arranged for Willow to stay with my friend Mrs. Harrington until the wedding," James Whitley explained over dinner. "A respected widow who often chaperones young ladies new to the city. It will preserve all propriety." "Wedding?" Willow asked, startled by the presumption. "Of course," Thomas said, taking her hand. "I thought we'd marry as soon as possible. Uncle James has already spoken to Reverend Phillips at his church." "But we haven't discussed. There's no reason to wait," Thomas interrupted gently. "We've both lost our families over this relationship." Making it official seems the logical next step. Logical. The word echoed in Willow's mind, not passionate or destined or even right, just logical. "I think," she said carefully, "that after everything that's happened, we should take some time to be sure this is what we both want." A flicker of something annoyance, concern, crossed Thomas's face before he smiled reassuringly. "Of course, if that's what you need, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Later that evening, settled in Mrs. Harrington's guest room, Willow sat at the window overlooking the lamplit street. Denver stretched around her, a growing city full of possibilities and new beginnings. Thomas had secured them a place in this world, a respectable future with comfort and social standing. So why did she feel as though she were suffocating? The answer came to her with unexpected clarity as she gazed up at the stars, barely visible through Denver's coal smoke and lamplight. Because this was Thomas's dream, not hers. In the days that followed, this realization grew stronger. Mrs. Harrington introduced her to Denver society, while Thomas proudly showed her the offices where he would be working and the fashionable neighborhoods where they might eventually live. Everyone was unfailingly kind, and the opportunities before her were greater than anything Los Animas could have offered. Yet, each night, Willow found herself at the window, looking westward toward the distant mountains, wondering where Kieran might be sleeping under those same stars. A week after their arrival in Denver, Thomas invited her to dinner at his uncle's home to discuss wedding plans. Seated in the elegant dining room, surrounded by fine china and crystal, Willow listened as Thomas and his uncle discussed dates, guest lists, and the business connections that might be cultivated through the celebration. "Of course, we'll need to create a suitable background story for Denver society," James remarked. "Something that explains your situation without mentioning the unfortunate feud or Willow's banishment. Perhaps we could say our families gave their blessing but couldn't attend due to business obligations," Thomas suggested. "An excellent solution," his uncle agreed. Willow set down her fork, a sense of wrongness washing over her. "So we begin our marriage with a lie." Both men looked at her in surprise. "Not a lie," Thomas said carefully. "A simplified version of a complicated situation." "My banishment isn't complicated," Willow countered. "It was painful and unjust, but it happened. I won't pretend otherwise to make Denver society comfortable." Thomas reached for her hand. Willow, I'm only trying to protect your reputation, my reputation. She pulled her hand away. Or your business prospects. James cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should give you two a moment alone. When he had left the room, Thomas turned to Willow, his expression concerned. What's wrong? I thought you'd be happy here. I thought so too, she admitted. But this isn't the life I want, Thomas. What are you saying? Willow took a deep breath, finally acknowledging the truth she'd been avoiding. I'm saying that loving someone isn't enough if you want different things from life. Different things. Willow, I'm offering you security, respectability, I know. And a week ago, I might have thought that was what I wanted. She met his gaze directly. But I've changed. The woman who was cast out of Las Animas isn't the same one sitting here now. Thomas stared at her, disbelief giving way to understanding. This is about him, isn't it, that cowboy? Willow considered denying it, but couldn't bring herself to lie. It's about me, she said instead. About realizing there's a whole world beyond Las Animas and Denver, beyond what our families and society dictate our lives should be. And Kieran O'Brien showed you this world. There was no question in Thomas's voice, only resignation. He showed me what it means to choose your own path, Willow corrected gently. To live by your own principles rather than others' expectations. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I do love you, Willow, I know. And I care deeply for you, but love should feel like freedom, not another set of constraints. She reached for his hand. You'll build a wonderful life here in Denver, but it's not the life for me. And what life is? He asked quietly. The answer rose to her lips with surprising certainty. One where I can see the stars clearly at night, where success is measured by hard work and integrity, not social standing. Where I answer to no one but myself and those I choose to journey with. Thomas studied her face, resignation gradually replacing his hurt. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question, and Willow didn't deny it. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said after a moment, a sad smile touching his lips. We both deserved to be banished from Las Animas. It was too small for either of us, just in different ways. He squeezed her hand. At least our ill-fated romance accomplished one thing. What's that? It got us both out, gave us both a chance at something better. He released her hand, even if better means different paths. The generosity of his response brought tears to Willow's eyes. Thank you for understanding. I don't, not entirely, Thomas admitted. But I want you to be happy, Willow, I always have. 2 days later, Willow stood on the platform at Denver's Union Station, a small valise in hand and a sense of nervous anticipation fluttering in her stomach. Thomas had insisted on seeing her off, his initial hurt giving way to a gracious acceptance that only increased her respect for him. You're sure about this? He asked, as the train's boarding call sounded. Tracking down a wandering cowboy across the Western Territories isn't exactly a conventional plan. I'm sure, Willow confirmed. Mrs. Holloway at the Pueblo boarding house said he retrieved his horse Sundown last week. The livery owner thought he was heading toward the McKinney Ranch in eastern Colorado. Thomas shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. Fairchilds and their determination. Some things never change. Willow hugged him goodbye. I hope you find happiness here, Thomas. You deserve it. As do you, he replied sincerely. Even if it's with a saddled tramp instead of a banker's nephew. She boarded the train with a lighter heart than she'd felt in weeks, finding a window seat that looked westward toward the mountains. As the locomotive pulled away from the station, Thomas raised his hand in farewell, a final goodbye to the life she might have had. The journey to the McKinney Ranch took 3 days, first by train to the nearest station, then by stagecoach, and finally by hired buggy across increasingly remote terrain. With each mile, Willow felt a growing sense of rightness, as if she were moving not away from civilization, but toward her true destination. The McKinney spread was substantial, thousands of acres of grazing land with a main house, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings clustered near a creek. As Willow's hired buggy approached, a ranch hand rode out to meet them. "Help you, madam," he called, eyeing her curiously. "I'm looking for Kieran O'Brien," she replied. "I was told he might be working here." The cowboy pushed back his hat. "O'Brien, yeah, he's here. Out with the north herd last I heard." He glanced at her fine dress and city valise. "You family, a friend," Willow said simply. "Is Mr. McKinney available? I'd like to speak with him." She was shown to the main house, where Horace McKinney, a gruff, practical man in his 60s, received her with skeptical curiosity. "O'Brien's one of my best hands," he said, after hearing her request to see Kieran. "Got back from Denver about a week ago, asked for the toughest assignment I had." Something eating at him, though he wouldn't say what. He studied her with shrewd eyes. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Willow met his gaze directly. "I might, which is why I need to speak with him." McKinney considered this, then nodded. "North Pasture's a half-day's ride. Got no one to escort you today, but O'Brien's due back tomorrow for supplies." His expression softened slightly. "You're welcome to wait in the foreman's cabin. Wife's sister is visiting, she'll chaperone, so there's no gossip." The wait was agonizing. Willow spent a restless night in the Spartan, but clean room offered to her, rehearsing what she would say when she finally saw Kieran again. Had she misread his feelings? Would he think her foolish for abandoning Denver's comforts and Thomas's devotion? What if he had already moved on, emotionally or literally? Morning seemed to take forever to arrive, and the hours stretched endlessly as she waited for word of Kieran's return. Finally, in late afternoon, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Peering through the cabin's small window, she saw him dusty from the trail, his familiar figure astride sundown, looking more at home in the saddle than any man had a right to. Her heart raced as she stepped outside. For a moment, he didn't notice her, focused on guiding his horse toward the stables. Then he looked up, and the recognition that flashed across his face was worth every mile of her journey. Kieran reined Sundown to an abrupt halt. "Willow." Disbelief colored his voice as he swung down from the saddle. She moved toward him, suddenly uncertain despite her days of planning. "Hello, Kieran. What are you doing here?" He stayed rooted in place, his expression cautious as if afraid to hope. "Is everything all right?" "Thomas is fine," she interjected. "Still in Denver, building his future with his uncle's firm." Confusion replaced caution on Kieran's face. "I don't understand. Neither did I at first." Willow took a step closer. "I thought I knew what I wanted, who I wanted, until you found me crying under that cottonwood tree and showed me a different way to live." A flicker of something hope, perhaps, crossed his features before he controlled it. "Willow, if you and Thomas have had some kind of disagreement, this isn't about Thomas," she interrupted gently. "It's about me. About realizing that the life waiting for me in Denver wasn't the one I truly wanted." "And what life do you want?" Kieran asked, his voice low and careful. Willow closed the remaining distance between them, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "One where I can see the stars clearly at night, where success is measured by hard work and integrity, not social standing." She reached for his hand, feeling its familiar calluses against her palm. "Where I answer to no one but myself and the man I choose to journey with." Kieran stared at their joined hands, then back at her face. "You left Denver for this, for you," she finished simply, "if you'll have me." The transformation of his expression from disbelief to joy was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "Willow Fairchild," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been half alive since I watched you ride away with Thomas." He lifted his free hand to touch her cheek. "Are you certain?" "This life isn't easy. It's not fine dresses and society parties." "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. "Love isn't wrong here, remember? You taught me that." The last of his restraint crumbled. Kieran pulled her to him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of longing finally fulfilled, of paths converging after too long apart. Willow melted into his embrace, the rightness of it confirming everything she'd come to believe during their separation. When they finally broke apart, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I should have told you how I felt before Thomas found us," he murmured, "but I thought I had no right. And I should have recognized what was happening to my heart during our journey," Willow responded, "but we're here now." "That's what matters." A throat cleared nearby. They turned to find Horace McKinney watching them with a mixture of amusement and approval. "Guessing you found what you came for, Miss Fairchild," he commented dryly. Willow blushed but didn't pull away from Kieran's side. "Yes, sir." "I believe I have. Good, because I was fixing to tell O'Brien here some news before you distracted him." McKinney's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Old Charlie Peterson selling his spread up near the Wyoming line. 200 acres, good water, decent house. Been trying to convince O'Brien to consider buying it. Ranch needs a good neighbor, and he's got the makings of a fine cattleman if he'd quit wandering and put down roots. Kieran stared at his employer in surprise. Sir, I appreciate the thought, but I don't have that kind of money saved yet. Charlie's willing to sell on terms to the right buyer, McKinney replied. Man's getting too old to work it himself, just wants to know it'll be in good hands. He glanced meaningfully between Kieran and Willow. Good hands usually come in pairs in this country. As McKinney walked away, Kieran turned back to Willow, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. It's not Denver, he said softly. It would be a hard life, especially at first, building something from almost nothing. It would be our life, Willow replied. Our choices, our rules, our future, she smiled up at him. Besides, I've been told I'm quite a good cook, might come in handy on a ranch. Kieran laughed, the sound rich with joy and relief. Willow Fairchild, I've loved you since I found you weeping under that cottonwood tree. I just never dared hope you might love me back. I do love you, she said simply. Enough to choose this life, our life, over any other. Under a vast Colorado sky, with the distant mountains as their witnesses, Kieran O'Brien kissed Willow Fairchild again, no longer a rescuer and a lost soul, but equal partners embarking on a journey neither had anticipated, but both now embraced with whole hearts. 3 years later, Willow O'Brien stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Kieran demonstrated to their 18-month-old son, Joseph, how to feed a bottle-fed calf. The boy's delighted giggles carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and chickens scratching in the nearby coop. The Peterson Ranch, now the O'Brien Ranch, had flourished under their care. What had begun as 200 acres had grown to 500 as they gradually purchased adjacent parcels. The modest house had been expanded with Kieran's skilled hands, a nursery added for Joseph and the second child now growing beneath Willow's heart. Their marriage, performed by a traveling preacher 6 months after their reunion at the McKinney Ranch, had been simple but deeply meaningful. Horace and Mrs. McKinney had stood as witnesses, along with neighboring ranchers who had quickly embraced the hardworking young couple. Life wasn't always easy. Winters could be harsh, markets unpredictable, and the work never-ending. But each challenge they faced together, their partnership growing stronger through shared struggles and triumphs. As Willow watched her husband swing their son onto his shoulders, her mind drifted back to that fateful day beneath the cottonwood tree. How lost she had felt, how certain that her banishment from Las Animas represented the end of everything worthwhile in her life. Instead, it had been just the beginning. A letter had arrived last week from Thomas, now successfully established in Denver's business community and recently engaged to a banker's daughter who shared his vision for their future. His words carried no bitterness, only genuine wishes for their happiness and news that the Barrett-Fairchild feud had finally begun to fade in Las Animas, with younger generations questioning its relevance. Willow hadn't attempted to reconcile with her parents, though she'd sent a brief note after Joseph's birth, informing them they had a grandson if they ever wished to know him. No response had come, but she had made peace with that reality. The family she had created with Kieran filled her life with more love than she had ever known in her father's house. Kieran approached the porch, Joseph still perched happily on his shoulders. Someone's hungry after all that hard ranching work, he announced, lifting their son down into Willow's waiting arms. Just like his father, she teased, pressing a kiss to Kieran's sun-weathered cheek. Speaking of hungry, Kieran said, resting a gentle hand on her slightly rounded belly, how are you feeling? Any better than this morning? Willow leaned into his touch. Much. This one doesn't seem to like breakfast, but by lunchtime, all is forgiven. Stubborn like their mama, Kieran observed with a grin. Determined, Willow corrected, matching his smile. There's a difference. As they headed inside together, Joseph chattering excitedly about the calf, Willow felt the familiar wave of gratitude that often overtook her at unexpected moments. Gratitude for the twist of fate that had led Kieran to find her that day. Gratitude for the courage, They'd both found to choose love over convention, freedom over security, an uncertain path over a predetermined one. Later that evening, with Joseph asleep in his small bed, Willow and Kieran sat on the porch swing, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The vastness above them was unobstructed by city lights or coal smoke, clear and infinite, just as she had once dreamed of. "Penny for your thoughts," Kieran said softly, his arm warm around her shoulders. Willow nestled closer. "I was thinking about what you said to me that first night." "Love isn't wrong here. Best words I ever spoke," Kieran replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Even if I had no idea where they'd lead us. To exactly where we're meant to be," Willow said with certainty. And as night deepened over their ranch, the stars multiplied above them like scattered diamonds on velvet, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their journey, and now their life together. A life built not on others' expectations, but on their own choices. A life where love had never been wrong, only waiting for the courage to embrace it fully. A life that had begun with tears beneath a cottonwood tree, but had blossomed into something more beautiful than either could have imagined. Not despite the hardships they'd faced, but because of them and because of the hands they'd found to hold through it all.